Small is beautiful. The Polish Navy. It's a small force, but has a long and proud history, dating from the 16th century right up to the Battle of the Atlantic. How does it need to adapt to the age of the naval drone? We'll discuss its history and its future in the robotic era. Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
After World War II, Poland was a founding member of the Warsaw Pact, a collective defense treaty signed in Warsaw, Poland, between the Soviet Union and 7 other Eastern Bloc socialist republics in May 1955. The Polish Navy, now purged of pre-war and Western-trained officers, would operate mainly in the Baltic Sea, which was considered a closed, Soviet-controlled theater. This bound the Polish Navy to a Soviet naval doctrine with missions assigned by Soviet admirals in Moscow. Thus, the Polish Navy's primary wartime roles would include securing the Baltic coastline from NATO incursions, supporting Soviet Baltic fleet operations against Denmark and West Germany, amphibious operations against Bornholm, Zealand, or northern German coasts, and laying massive minefields to close the Danish straits to NATO. These missions were practiced in frequent maritime exercises involving thousands of Marines. Over several decades, Poland developed the second largest Baltic Navy after the Soviet Union. By the mid-1980s, the Polish Navy had around 130 to 150 vessels, including 14 submarines, dozens of missile and torpedo boats, a large amphibious warfare branch, and significant minesweeping forces. These included Polish-made Północny-class landing ships exported to the Soviet Union, East Germany, India and Vietnam, Krakowiak-class minesweepers, and Project 620P patrol ships. The shipyards of Gdynia, Gdańsk and Szczecin were essential to the Warsaw Pact naval industrial base. But the economic crisis in the 1980s slashed fuel and maintenance budgets. Soviet electronics and components contributed to the Polish fleet's rapid aging, and the decline of communist power in Poland brought about the decline of the Polish Navy. For many years, the Polish Navy lingered in stagnation. Recently, however, with the looming Russian threat, Poland has been updating its naval power. Examples? On November 26th, Poland said it had chosen Sweden's Saab to supply it with 3 submarines in a deal worth billions of dollars. As recently as this Thursday, a bow block of the up-and-coming state-of-the-art Miecznik-class ORP Wicher was transported from the Kryst shipyard to the PGZ naval shipyard in Gdynia. The Wicher is the first out of the 3 planned multi-purpose missile frigates intended to bolster the Polish Navy's capabilities.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Chris Sams, an independent naval historian, and his speciality is the early 20th century. So welcome to the programme.
Hello, thanks for having me.
But today we'll be talking about discussing the rise of the Polish Navy. So as we saw in the clip, it has a long tradition, 17th century start. What was the point of the Polish Navy in the 17th century?
Well, at first it sort of starts out as most navies do, for coastal defence, protection of trade, as well as the Baltic. You're surrounded by people that want to attack you, and so it's good to have someone to defend your coast. The Polish also had a small force of privateers that were going out and causing problems, but that upset the Hanseatic League somewhat with their trading. But the early Polish Navy was mainly sort of directed against fighting the Russians and then the Swedish.
And what was you mentioned the privateers? These takes a lot of money to build a ship and to run a ship. How did that infrastructure come about?
Mostly through taxation for the regular navy, but with the privateers, they tended to be originally start off as merchants who'd made enough money, and then there's a lot of financial gain to be had in basically state-sponsored piracy. Yeah. And you get to
English were very good at it.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Spanish.
Francis Drake, one of our greatest heroes, a pirate, and it just continues. But it obviously can affect trading partnerships, and with the Hanseatic trading, covering the whole of the Baltic, constantly attacking their ships, draw some powerful enemies, and so privateers are also quite handy that you can disavow them and go, oh, it's nothing to do with us.
Yes, deniable plausibility, I suppose, as we know now. And in Polish naval history, we have a battle with the Teutonic Knights, late 15th century, and then there's the first battle, the first battle that's been attributed to the Polish Navy as such is the Battle of Oliva in the early 17th century. Could you sketch us in what happened there?
Yes, I believe that one was against the Russian Navy, and they were outnumbered by the Russians, but still managed to defeat them, and it gave freed up Riga, which would then become part of the Polish naval infrastructure as well, I think.
And so we have the beginnings of a Polish fleet, obviously in Britain or in England, developed to a great extent in the 17th and 18th century. Why was the Polish growth, naval growth, stunted? We talked about the topography of the Baltic before we came on.
Yes, it's mostly geographical. With Britain and England, we are surrounded by sea. So if you want to go anywhere, you need boats and ships. And we set our sights beyond the island, whereas with Poland and also Germany, you are surrounded by land enemies. And when it comes to the investment for military, everyone wants to invest in what's going to be the most effective. And if you've got, say, the Russian army coming in from your east, or the German army coming in from the west, or the Austro-Hungarians coming in from the south, then you need a larger army. So that draws a lot more investment. And ships are expensive. And they do spend a lot of time sat in port, which is,
yes.
Again, expensive on crew, on supplies, on constant maintenance. Whereas with infantry, you can get them in, train them, send them home, and bring them back for regular training. England
used the Baltic area as a source of much of its raw materials to build its fleet. How come England was successful in doing that and Poland didn't? Did it not capitalise on its own resources?
I think it was probably due to the money. England was always more than happy to spend a large amount of money on the fleet, except around the Civil War period where we cut a king's head off because of naval taxes.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was the Navy is seen, especially sort of during the Napoleonic War, as the wooden walls of the country. So that investment was necessary, and so I suppose we were more ready to spend a large amount of money to get the resources. Whereas both Poland, we don't need this much wood if we're going to have an army.
Yeah.
To maintain our defence.
And what sort of ships, what sort of warships were prevalent on the Baltic? Were they galleys or were they sailing ships? How did they look?
Mostly they were smaller sailing ships. The larger ship of the line, such as HMS Victory, that we had, weren't necessary because you don't have to cross such a large area. I think the Swedish built the Vasa for war in the Baltic, and that didn't end well. So they tended to be a lot smaller than sort of other British ships, the sort of English ships you'd see in the Napoleonic War, and even probably sort of the galleon size that Spain and England were using during the 16th century. So smaller, faster, less guns.
On the Vasa side is fascinating wreck that they recovered. What was that? What could that have been used for? Would that have been a kind of dreadnought type ship that it would have plonked itself in the middle of the Baltic to terrorise and pacify its neighbours? How it's a huge ship in comparison to what you say.
Oh yes, absolutely. That would have been sort of the Admiral's flagship. It was a statement of Sweden's power, much like the dreadnought would later become a statement of Britain's power. Battleships sort of become the centre of navalism, and if you have one big warship that scares the heck out of everyone else,
yeah.
And just can provide a vast amount, they become fleet killers on their own.
Yeah.
The good thing is any smart admiral just tries to, when you're facing a fleet with one of those, is you go somewhere else and attack the smaller ships.
Final question to you on this half. Poland doesn't get a chance, or can't afford, or doesn't want to afford a fleet. It has its land-based threats. Which powers fill the gap in the Baltic?
Mostly, surprisingly, Sweden, as well as Russia to a degree. But Sweden have, it's something I'm learning a lot more about in recent months. But the Swedish Navy and the Swedish Army become, because we talk about Sweden, we think of ABBA and IKEA, and you don't think maybe Vikings, but their ability to take over large swathes of territory in Eastern Europe and Russia is phenomenal.
Yes.
And so they rapidly become the power in the Baltic through the 17th and 18th century.
We'll take a look at our second clip, which will focus on the rebirth of the Polish fleet after 1918.
After 123 years of partitions, Poland regained its independence on November 18, 1918. 2 years later, a Polish army general, Józef Haller, arrived in the port city of Puck on a strip of the Baltic coastline granted to Poland by the Versailles Treaty. There, the general wed Poland to the Baltic Sea, symbolically casting a platinum ring into its waters. During the ceremony, the flag of the Polish Navy was raised on a mast to the sound of a 21-gun salute, implying that from then onward, the Polish seacoast was guarded by the Navy. As early as 1923, the construction of the Gdynia naval base began to accommodate the developing Polish fleet. Gdynia was chosen because Gdańsk enjoyed the status of an independent city-state, albeit one under heavy German influence. With the neighboring German navy growing in power by the month, Poland opted for the strategy of keeping small but modern ships capable of threatening enemy supply lines. Built by the UK, France, and the Netherlands, some of them managed to slip out of the German Navy's noose in the first days of World War II to strike back, catching the Axis off guard. Take ORP Orzeł, for instance. The Polish submarine fled from Estonian internment and made it without maps to the British Isles. Operating from there on April 8, 1940, it sank the German freighter Rio de Janeiro, which was carrying 400 German troops tasked with landing in Norway. And last but not least, behold ORP Piorun, the dreadnought that weakened the state-of-the-art German destroyer Bismarck and marked its location for the British warships to deliver the final blow. These are only 3 of the more than 20 vessels that made the Axis lives on the sea miserable.
Okay, we'll look at now the interwar period, 1918. Poland is reborn after 120 odd years of partition, and again a navy is formed. What kind of navy is that? And again, pose to you the question: what was the point of the Polish navy?
I think in 1918, because it's quite early in November 1918, just as the armistice is formed, that and Poland becomes one, that they immediately say we need a navy, and they manage to get 6 German torpedo boats. They're fairly old, they're sort of the A-class ones, and they've been disarmed, but they have these 6 torpedo boats because they feel that the whole of Eastern Europe is falling apart, and this is something that we don't often cover in Britain, but you've got lots of states trying to form themselves and gain power, or at least legitimacy, and having a navy adds to legitimacy. In fact, when they get their first torpedo boats, they don't actually have any ports because they still haven't sorted out the land.
Yes, because they build Gdynia in the 1920s, don't they?
Yeah, and they also managed to get a hold of the Austro-Hungarian river fleet as well, in large numbers. And as through the 1920s, because they want to defend themselves, and also because France want a strong Poland, because with Russia's collapse and descent into communism, France has lost its eastern border, because if ever there's going to be a resurgent Germany, you need someone to attack them from the other side, so they don't have a repeat of the Franco-Prussian War, of the German army just smashing through France if you can divide their forces. So they want Poland to be strong as well, so they're giving them funds, training, they give them an old armoured cruiser to form sort of a centre of the fleet. And there's a continuing evolving plan for the Polish Navy to be bigger. They wanted some of the old German pre-dreadnoughts, but Versailles denied them that. But there's constant plans through the 1920s of we need more cruisers, we need more destroyers, we need a large fleet of submarines.
Could you outline us the brief history of this flotilla, the Brown Navy fleet that they had? Because that's often ignored about. When we're dealing with Polish naval history, we think seagoing stuff.
I think that's a problem with naval historians in general. We're a bit snobbish. We all like battleships. But the river fleet's quite interesting. You have large waterways that we in England just don't, and you can police those and use them to assist the army in the same way that the British did in Mesopotamia, with small warships with large amounts of firepower. And they used them quite effectively during the Polish-Soviet War in the 1920s, and managed to capture the Russian Dnieper fleet force, and then even using them up into Chernobyl. They continue to be really effective. By the beginning of the First World War, they've got several monitors, which are usually shallow draft warships with sort of battleship or heavy guns, which then can provide artillery support for any army action that's going on nearby.
And this was an integral part of the Polish Navy rather than part of the Polish land forces.
Absolutely, yeah. They were, although they would work very strongly with the army, they're very reliant on the army for what's going on. Yeah. But they would also form a major part of the eastern defence for Poland along the Vistula.
And what's the state of the Polish Navy in 1939 coming up to the German invasion? We talked a bit about this Operation Peking and the defence of the Bay of Gdańsk, the Hela Peninsula. Talk to us about that.
Well, by 1939, because of the 1929 crash and lack of investment, and more similar as we've seen in the 18th and 17th or the 17th century, there hasn't been the investment in the Navy. And instead they've got 4 destroyers, 2 Grom class, 2 Witcher class, a large force of minesweepers and mine layers, and 5 submarines, 3 mine layers and 2 attack submarines. And Admiral Unrug, who is the commander, he's a former U-boat commander. Who's,
great character.
Oh, fantastic. I know it's slightly off topic, but I love that when he got captured, he was taken prisoner by the Germans, and they said, you're a German officer in the Kaiserliche Marine, you have German family, come and join the Kriegsmarine, we'll make you a Vice Admiral. And he said to them in Polish, after the 1st of September 1939, I no longer remember German, which is fantastic. But he came up with the idea of hit and fade on the German Navy, because he knew that the German Navy, although the Kriegsmarine is fairly small in comparison to the Royal Navy, they're larger than the Polish Navy, and they're going to come in with unrelenting force. The British managed to convince the Polish government that the three of the destroyers could go to Britain, and then they could come back as part of a British force to retake the Baltic, which doesn't happen. But you get the Peking plan, and the Grom, Błyskawice and Burza leave just before the invasion. They're tailed by the Kriegsmarine and the Luftwaffe for a little bit, but then they made it all the way to the Firth of Forth, where they find out that the invasion's happened. The submarines go out to form sort of a mining defence. They're sat on their bases, and the Baltic's quite shallow, so they can't carry out sort of a U-boat war that you'd see in the Atlantic.
When you say quite shallow, you mean few hundred metres?
Yeah. So the problem is they can be seen by aircraft flying over, whereas in the North Sea or the Atlantic you can go quite deep. So they sit on their bases. They go to their bases in the daytime, then go out and lay mines to defend the Hel Peninsula. You also get the Witcher leading a force of mine layers out into Danzig Bay to try and lay as many mines as possible to catch the inevitable German invasion, or even better, catch the Schleswig-Holstein as she leaves. Unfortunately, they get picked up by the Luftwaffe and heavily bombed. One of the vessels which is carrying all the mines jettisons them because they're highly explosive and they don't want to get caught and blown up. So when they get to where they're supposed to be dropping their mines, they haven't got anything to drop. Yeah. And then turn around, they get attacked by the Luftwaffe again, and then when they get into port, they're bombed repeatedly. Lutyens, who'd later become the admiral in charge of the Bismarck, leads a couple of destroyers into the ports, and the Polish Navy and Polish naval armed defence network managed to repel them with shell fire. And
yes, it's quite a fascinating sort of not a sideshow, but a side campaign to the main land campaign. Tell us about the submarine that made the escape from the Baltics.
Oh, yes.
Without any maps.
Yes, the Orzeł. Because one of them, I think it was the Warwick, managed to escape. The other 3 get interned, but the Orzeł, she got depth charge, on the first day. And she then crash dive, hit the bottom of the Baltic, all the lights blew out, the captain loses his nerve, and so they go to Estonia, where they're interned, and then there becomes a diplomatic battle about this submarine. The Russians and the Germans want it interned, and the Estonians are saying, well, we can't really because it's neutral, we're neutral. There's so much pressure put on them that the captain just leaves. His nerve is completely shot. So the first officer decides on a breakout plan, and they manage to capture some Estonian guards, break out of the port, get out into Sweden, into the Baltic, and they use a school atlas and a book on Swedish lighthouses to help navigate their way as to how far they are through the Baltic, then across the North Sea to Britain. And it's the Orzeł actually goes on to serve with the Royal Navy and is almost scuppers the German invasion of Norway by sinking a transport ship called the Rio de Janeiro the day before the invasion. They do the usual cruiser rules, stop them, search, or demand to be searched. The Germans are playing for time, and the captain in the end says, "We haven't got time for this," and torpedoes them and sinks them. And it's full of trucks, supplies, horses, and lots of German soldiers in uniform who are washed up in Norway and taken by the Norwegian police to be interrogated, where they just tell them the truth and say, "We're part of an invasion, it's coming tomorrow." But that doesn't get communicated to Oslo, and had it, then everyone would have known the Germans were coming.
So the Polish Navy becomes a navy in exile. It's re-equipped by the British to a large extent. It expands its personnel and its equipment, and it chases or at least one ship chases the Bismarck.
Yes, the Pure.
Tell us about that.
Yes, she's a British donated destroyer, and after the sinking of the Hood, the British are trying to find Bismarck, and then the Royal Navy only has two settings: subtle and unrelenting force. And when it comes to Bismarck, it's unrelenting force, and they're trying to find her. And a group of destroyers managed to find her and try launching torpedoes and gunfire, which isn't going to damage her at all, really. But the Puron keeps coming out of the mist and signalling, "We are Polish, we are Polish," to try and draw fire from the Germans. During the Narvik campaign as well, the Polish destroyers were known for getting in danger close to the German shore positions and firing at point blank range, and the Germans hated them for it.
Why is this? Is this a particular this training by Unrug, the commander, the training of the officers, the officer class?
I think so, but I think there's also a lot of hatred for the Germans, and there are rumours even by Norway of the oppression and stories getting out about how brutal the Germans are being to Poland, and they kind of want their revenge. And Norway and Narvik is Poland's first sort of major military engagement since the invasion, and so they're kind of trying to prove a point. Even the Polish army that go in fight tooth and nail when they really don't have to. And certainly the British aren't getting in as dangerous, fighting as hard as the Polish are. But yeah, the Grom and the Błyskawice would get in as close as possible, which unfortunately is what it does for the Grom in the end.
And what's the reputation of the Polish Navy gains at the end of the war? Obviously, Poland is passed over into the Soviet camp. The Navy is forced to give back some of its equipment. But what's the legacy of that? Those 6 years on the Polish Navy itself, its reputation.
They were considered very, very capable by the Royal Navy and aggressive. They had 3 U-class submarines in the Mediterranean, and they were known for pushing home their attacks. The most famous example, though, is Błyskawice at the Battle of Cowes. The Luftwaffe came in to bomb Cowes and the Isle of Wight, and Błyskawice was undergoing refit. Her captain had denied British Admiralty rules of having ammunition on board, because in theory you should take all ammunition off to give to ships that are going to war. He felt rather unsafe, so he demanded ammunition, and as the German Air Force came in, he put the destroyer right out in the Solent where he could engage the German aircraft that were coming in on the deck. They fired so much that the anti-aircraft guns started to glow red hot, so they were using buckets of seawater to put it out. He then sent medics ashore to help the civilian population, radio technicians to go in and reset up the telephone networks and communicate the defences, and that one destroyer helped defend. Although there were a large amount of civilians that were killed, if she hadn't been there it would have been a lot worse. And every year they have a celebration with the Polish Navy to mark this battle.
It's an amazing tradition that they've built up in this short time. What was the tradition about now they find themselves on the other side, the invading side, the Warsaw Pact side. Was the Navy given a different ethos, a different doctrine?
I believe so. I mean, although always going to be playing second fiddle to the Soviet Navy to a degree, they do have their independence in a way that they can police their own waters, they can man their own ships, they can continue the naval tradition that they've started, albeit under Soviet auspices.
Yeah. A final few questions to you. The Baltic Sea doesn't change very much.
No.
The situation, getting money from the Polish treasury, doesn't change either from the 17th century. What's the position of the Polish fleet now? The second part would be, how does, if you were the commander of the Polish Navy, how would you tailor the Navy for this new era of drone warfare that the Ukrainians seem to be doing very successfully in the Black Sea?
Yeah, I think Poland will need to balance its sovereign needs with the needs of NATO, because although, as we go back to the 18th century or even the 20th century, you're surrounded by three enemies at all times, usually Sweden, Germany and Russia. Now it's arguably just Russia. So you need to be constantly looking east, patrolling as close as you can to Kaliningrad, but also looking at your own sovereign needs. But I would be looking at smaller vessels rather than larger ones. They're cheaper, they can carry out the mission more. Submarines are always good. But with drone warfare, drones are taking the place that aircraft took in sort of the late 1930s into 1941. They're cheap, they're inexpensive, they can do a lot of damage. So it might be worth investing in a lot more anti-shipping drones and going down the anti-shipping, for your anti-shipping needs, go down that way rather than having warships, which are expensive and high maintenance costs.
Yes, I mean, is this recognised by the navies, not just of Poland, but of the world? Do you think that they're kind of, is the aircraft carrier the dreadnought of its era? I
think it was absolutely during the Second World War. Not so much in the sort of the European theatres, because everyone's quite close, and with the Atlantic it became necessary, but mainly for anti-U-boat work. But in the Pacific, aircraft carriers are absolutely fundamental, because you're taking your air cover for your invasions with you. With drones, I think what's happened fairly recently with the Black Sea has opened up a lot of eyes around the world, because much like with the aircraft carrier, you have the post-World War I naval theorists who believe in big gun theory. Yeah. Everyone's gone, well, we've got what we were saying about the Americans, well, we've got these aircraft carrier task groups. We don't need anything else. When 100-odd small drones can come in and puncture a hole in a warship and sink it, then you've got to start thinking about how are we facing this. So I think the big powers around the world need to look at their investment and possibly the face of naval warfare going on. Big and small powers, I suppose, Poland included. Yes. Chris Sams, thank you very much for coming onto the programme. Great to have you. Me. Right, that's all we have time for today. So join us again for How We Got Here. You know the time, you know the place. Tuesdays 9:35 p.m, 21:35, and we'll see you then.